So, I'm going to talk a little bit about bringing singing and voice technique and singing tuition into the new millennium. So, actually what's going on is that the world develops so fast around us, but we have a problem. And the problem is that the singing tuition and the voice technique have not undergone the same development as the rest of the world has, as other disciplines have. So what we see here is that the reason for this should probably be found in history. So singers are deprived of a sense, the sight, and that's why for many years it was impossible simply to find out what was going on because we couldn't see. So those singers who were good, they were named teachers. Well, you can teach, you sing well, you teach. So they started teaching, and since they didn't know what was going on, they started teaching by their sensations. And these sensations was transferred from one generation to the next generation, and then it was handed down to the next generation. These sensations was blended, mixed with new sensations. So altogether, nobody really knew what was going on. Because that's a problem when you have a thing like sensation. It is subjective. We don't know 100% what is going on. And if we take an example here, it is like, let's all eat a little piece of a chocolate. So we get exactly the same chocolate, all of us, we take a bite. And what happens is that we will now describe it to somebody who has never in their life tasted chocolate. And what will go on? We will have some people who would talk about the texture, say, ooh, it's soft, or ooh, it's hard. Some people talk about the taste, it could be salt, it could be bitter. Some people would talk about aesthetics, like, delicious, or awful. Some people would start judging and say, oh, this is very bad for you, this is unhealthy. And the thing is, we are all right. We are completely right, because this is our sensation. And that is a confusing thing when you are somebody who has never tasted chocolate. So you get all these various words, and you're not really that much closer to what it is. You got a lot of sensation, but you can't transfer them to yourself unless you have exactly the same sensation. So that is what happens also with singing technique. Since we don't have the sight, we can say everything. We can say, well, you just sing with your knees. But would we accept, would the smallest child accept that somebody says, you play guitar with your knees? To go, never, because everybody, it's so obvious, we can see that we don't use the knees. So since nobody knew what was going on, and then the sounds that the singers, the singing teachers, singing teachers, that they didn't like, that was judged unhealthy. Oh, this is not good. So a lot of myth was created, and they flourished. And actually, they still do today. So if we have one myth saying that a classical singer cannot sing rhythmic stuff, rock, pop, anything, and vice versa. So the same voice cannot do two things. Well, of course it can, because if you compare it with a hand, you can see, well, this hand, it can write, it can maybe play a violin, it can play the piano, but it can do many different things. So it's not like, oh no, it learned to write, now it can't play piano. What a pity. We simply have to accept that we can do many things, we just have to learn how to do it. And that's the same, all these food myths that you hear around there. There's a lot of, oh, you shouldn't eat this, and if your horse, it's very good with a raw egg yolk, or have a little glass of water with the ink in. I actually heard somebody suggesting that. So I don't know how that should help, because everything we eat and everything we drink, that goes directly into the food pipe. Let's go to the wind pipe, hopefully. That is where the voice is. So we might as well put it in the hair. It has no effect anyway. So then there's a lot of people talking about cooling down. So you have to cool down the hand or the voice when you've used it. No, if you compare with a hand you've been writing, and you're so tired, you don't start writing slower and slower and slower in order to cool it down. No, you simply stop. And that's the same with a voice. You don't need to cool it down once you've used it. If you're tired, stop. using it. And then we have the placement of a sound. We hear that a lot, don't we? Don't we hear, ooh, you have to place a sound. It is like you sing from the eyes, or it is like a unicorn. You sing like a unicorn. Okay? It is like sing in the mask. Bring the tone forward. But how can you place a sound? So if I want to place a sound, I want to sing only to you, but the rest of you are not going to hear it. No, you heard it. So it is not possible. We cannot place a sound. So for this myth is really flourishing at the moment. Then a lot of people say, you just have to believe in it. So if it doesn't work, try again and believe in it. And I say, no. Why should you believe in it? It is not religion. Singing technique and religion are two different things. So what the whole thing is, if there's anything you are in doubt of, well, try it out. Test it on yourself. If it works, it's great. If it doesn't work, well, then you don't use it. You don't need to believe it. So, by us having all these different kind of myths flowing around, well, this is so hard to share knowledge. And that is the problem we're in. We cannot make new discoveries, and then we cannot improve because we are just ourselves. Every singing teacher is isolated. It's like a little island. And that creates some unhealthy relationships sometimes between the singer and the teacher. And it is like the teacher owns the singer. It is like that the teacher that is protecting and closing in on the singer, and the singer feel obliged to not go to any other teachers because it would be almost like committing adultery. So we better stay there. We don't want to upset the teacher. And that happens a lot because then we get solo lessons on one-to-one basis, and everybody in singing is familiar with this way of teaching. And that's a problem. That's a problem because singing tuition is the second most expensive education in the country. And it's just right after becoming a pilot. So this is extremely expensive. And does it really need to be so expensive? Also, when everybody is behind closed doors and the teaching is not transparent, then the rumors and the secret starts. And then everybody goes, what is happening inside that door? Because it's one-to-one and you can never get to it. So either you are in the session or you're left out in the dark. And then teachers claim, well, I have some special knowledge, but you have to come to me. You have to come to a private lesson, and then I'll tell you. Let you in on the secret. So that is where the competition starts. So the singer and the teacher, they start to compete about having the right teacher and having the right singer. So the teacher starts name-dropping. They started name-dropping as if the famous person they've been teaching, they were name-dropping about, if their fame would drop off a little bit, or as if you have been teaching a very famous person, then it automatically validates your technique. And on the other hand, vice versa, it is the same for the singers. They start in a race about having the right teacher. So sometimes they see a teacher, and not only because they want the technique that the teacher is teaching, but because the teacher is very important in music business. So you actually have to take singing lessons to be able to get to the auditions or to get the jobs. So that's why you don't necessarily go to a singing teacher to get the teaching, but simply to stay in business and to get the jobs. And all this happened, and that was of course natural because we couldn't see anything. But then there was a big science breakthrough throughout the 19th century. And God and religion were replaced with scientific reasons, and they gave up finding evidence of the soul and for the spirit when they cut up the bodies. So that's where it came a brand new breakthrough in medical science. And so the science has actually gained ground in all communities. Everybody, the medical have, for instance, an extensive terminology. So they can communicate across different fields of the medical business and also across different countries. And they can work together. They can collaborate. We see that here. They exchange ideas, they discuss, and of course then they improve. And science are accepted in all trades, from medicine all the way to architecture. But how is it about the music business? Well, there is some music, part of the music business, that is actually do have some kind of terminology. The musicians, they share the terminology. The composers, the conductors, sound engineers, light engineers, a lot of people. But there is one little tiny group that do not have an accepted terminology, and that is singers. So, what's the big deal about this? Well, the problem is if we don't have a terminology together, well, then the problem is it will have a negative impact. It will have it on the communication. It will have a negative impact on the clarity, on the logic and the structure of what we're doing, on research and on development. And it will result in a lot of myths. So what we did was that we said, okay, let's see are we really right? Is this really so terrible? Can the singing community really be the only one without a terminology? Let's check it out. So we tested it, and we made a study where we wanted to see how singing teachers, what kind of terminology they used. So what we did was that we wrote out to all the singing teachers in Europe, and we wanted to see what kind of terms they were using, and we wanted to see how agreeing they were. They might actually have some terms that they used that maybe was not that defined, but everybody agreed on it. And then again, it would be all right. So we had 25 people replying from 12 different nations. And what we did was that we took 11 short samples, and they have different styles, all kinds of styles. And they have some songs were very dramatic, sometimes very dramatic changes inside a little line, or sometimes it was smooth. And what we did was that here you see the 11 styles, so there's a lot of different styles here. And what we did, we asked them to write down every time something new happened in the music. And we asked them to describe with their own words the elements they hear and use the terms that they would use when they teach at their professional conservatories and universities. And then we gave them an assessment form where we said, this is just like a paper, millimeter paper, and they could write whatever they want. So this was a lyric on top here, and then whenever they heard something new, they could make a little break and say, this we call this we call this, and if they heard more things, they could write further down what they wanted. So this way they could illustrate exactly where something new happened and what they would call it. So just to give an example, I show this from Dio singing.
Don't dream of women, 'cause they'll only bring you down.
So this was one of the styles. There were many others. And what we did was that we broke it down. So we took just every word, don't. So what would they call that? We wrote all the possibilities, and every time somebody agreed, well, they came up to 2. So then we took the next word, like dream, and when we come to down, there's happening from da, to n. We broke that up as well, so it was down, like that. So then we wrote the whole thing down. Then we listed all the immense responses. It was like 8,411 different responses. And then we looked at it, and we found that they were actually the answers could be grouped in categories. So some were method specifics, some were production of sound, so like anatomical, so it could be a high larynx, it could be perceptual, so anterior part of the face is resonating. Some could describe the sound, so they could, for instance, use acoustic term by, say, jitter. They could use phonetic terms, so glottal onset, for instance. They could use simple adjectives like clear tone, projected, angry. They could use imagery, so open sounds. Then some of them used musical terms like coloratura, screamo, that kind of thing. Some had emotional, that it was beautiful or despairing. Some people mixed the terms, so they had open chest or chest resonant pressed. And then there were those that we couldn't really put into anything, so we put them into others. It's a nice category. We have descriptive terms like light, blend, healthy, unhealthy. We have comments like this is a no-go in classical world. And we have people using imagery like fish face and so on. So there was a lot of different things here. So they were distributed like kind of evenly, of course some more than the other. And what did we come up with? Well, the result was we saw 25 singing teachers with 11 song examples. And we have 8,411 responses in each little one. And there was 420 terms used for 25 singing teachers. Well, that was actually pretty amazing. We were a little in shock about that. Of course, when we look at this, we should say there is no right and no wrong. We simply look on agreement here. And we have to remember that everyone was experienced singing teachers at the highest level. They have been teaching for many years because they stated how long time they were teaching and all that. And some terms were actually used frequently, but not with the same sound. And a lot of it was down to simply individual preference. And some people wrote, well, I don't teach that genre. But still, they should be able to define the sound, maybe. So there were 420 terms altogether, and that was an agreement of 25%. And so it was actually worse than we thought. We thought we had a problem. We find out we had a big problem. If you'd like to try it yourself, you can go and test the survey here. So we talked about this in the society, and we actually got a resistance, a distinct resistance about this. So some people say, well, it can't be done. You can't have a neutral terminology. And some people were simply reluctant to embrace any new things that were coming up. And some people claimed, well, the voice should be treated as a whole. I think it's important to take the voice apart. It is important simply because science is separating the various elements. And it is, when you take the voice apart, it improves our ability to analyze in detail. So when we separate taste and technique, then we separate the elements, and then it's possible to combine them in a new way. And when we combine them in the way that the singer wants it, because then all these ready-made packages, that if you want to sing classical, it has to sound like this. If you want to sing pop, it should sound like this. No, you can combine the elements exactly like you want and create your own style. So, and that improves understanding and control if we are taking the things apart. Yeah, and some people claim, oh, this is a problem because then we don't like anymore the voice when you take it apart. And this is not what we experienced. On the opposite, we have had much more enjoyment of listening to all these various elements. So now it is about time to take singing tuition out of the dark and enter into the new millennium. So where science has been a tool in all trades, so why not in the singing community? So we want to get rid of imprecise and confusing terminology. We want to get rid of the myth because they could be potentially damaging. We want a defined terminology and that we can communicate in a clear way, and we want a defined terminology so we can test the logic we have, and we can discuss, and we should be able to exchange our ideas and talk to our colleagues. So, We need to take an honest and skeptical look at ourselves and our work. We have to be clear about what kind of aspect we're teaching. We have to test our claims, and we have to test if the teaching are actually working. So, the technique should be concrete and efficient in practice. So a couple of things here we need. So the technique could apply with anatomy and physiology. It needs, we need to have logical and rational explanation supported by evidence. We need to have a clear terminology, and every term must have a definition, and every sound must have only one term, and every term must mean only one thing. So we separate taste and technique. The technique should have a genre-free approach. The teacher's own taste is irrelevant to the singer, because he or she is just one out of thousands. We cannot today say anymore, it should sound like this or sound like this, because there are so many free options. So the teacher's personal choice of taste is not important. Of course, if you are assigned as a producer, it's something else. But if you're a singing teacher, I don't believe that the singing teacher's idea of what sounds good or bad is relevant for the singer. So we want to separate the elements so the singer can put together the sound they want. And we want no dogmas. Everything has to be open for debate and for change. So we should have an environment, we should be an environment of critical thinkers, and we should scrutinize our own work. So let's get rid of the unhealthy relationships between teachers and singers. Let's lower the cost at singing tuition. So teaching groups is them solos. Encourage singers to take lessons from many singing teachers. Many singing teachers should collaborate on the same singer, so they can exchange what ideas they have. So the teaching should be transparent, and that means that it's accessible for everybody, and that everybody can benefit from it. For those tips that work for some might work for others. Why not be transparent about it? And we should avoid name dropping and talk about technique instead. And we should have clear marketing within ourselves, so singer knows if we are teaching technique or we are actually providing job as an agent. We should avoid competition and instead encourage collaboration between singers and teachers. So conferences like this is actually a proof that there is a will to communicate. So we want to learn from each other. So this is a good thing. And like the rest of the world, we should have an extensive mutual terminology so we can communicate wherever we go, in whatever country we are, we hear, and we should be able to talk together and use the same words. And the terminology should make it possible for us to collaborate, to exchange ideas, to discuss results and improve. And then I believe we can enter happily in the new millennium. Thank you.